And the next important lesson about grids, about layout in general, and about typography is length. What is the ideal length or width of the text should be, and how to use this ideal length in the future, why we should know about that. Let's talk about it. The very first thing, let's define what is the ideal range and how it's defined. According to material design guidelines, the ideal length of the text is 40-60 characters. According to some other sources, there should be between 45 and 90 characters in the line. In one line, we have from 40 to 90 characters. And it's defined by the accessibility tests when people did their research about how people read and where you become tired of reading just one line of the text. So this is where we found these numbers, like from 40 to 60 characters for material design guidelines, or 45-90 for some other sources. Basically, you can took the average, like from 40 to 80, and that will be great. And this is where we are talking about where we have lots of text, like we will have more than 2, 3, 5 lines of text at once. So this is the length of the text should be. When it comes to short lines, then it should be 20-40 characters. And what is short line? Short line is when you have, for example, one short sentence and you don't want to break it into smaller pieces, like, you just have one sentence which is pretty short, and then you decided, for example, to break it into 2-3 lines. It will be too much. Actually, let me show you some examples so you will understand. Before that, let's also define what does it mean, like 40-60 characters. It's not in pixels, so how we should define it, and why it's in characters and not in pixels. The reason is pretty simple. Again, because we are reading with our eyes and with our brain, we see the characters, we don't see the pixels. For us, width can be different, right? For example, when I'm reading the small text or the huge one in pixels, the distance, the length will be really different. But from text perspective, the text that I will see in these pixels will be the same. So that's why the length of the line is defined by number of characters and not pixels. What's important to understand that different fonts have different length of the text, and how to define, for example, what's the length of the text should be. Should I count each sign every time? Actually, no. Once you master your eyes for that, you will understand how to do this fast and easily. But before that, if you want to master it, just understand that you can use just alphabet of your language that you are working with, and 2 lengths or 3 lengths of this alphabet will be the length of your long text. I'll give you an example a little bit later, but before that I want to show you, here's the difference between the length of the text in characters when we have absolutely the same size of the text, but we have different font. The first one is Helvetica Neue, and the second one's Roboto Mono, which is Mono font, and where all the characters have the same width for their glyphs. And as you can see here, I and W have the same length, while here I and W have different length width. The glyphs themselves have different width, and because of that the line can be completely different in pixels. And should we use like this one or this one? It's really hard to understand. That's why we are applying alphabet length, because in the alphabet we have all the letters, and like thin one like I, J, L, what else here? So basically that's it. And then we have really wide ones like M, W, and the mid-range, all other letters. So that's why to define the width of the text, just apply the length of the alphabets and the ideal range, because alphabet is, for example, in English it's 26 characters. 2 alphabets will be 52 characters, and this is the ideal range, the ideal width of your text. Still hard to understand, right? Because there is no particular example where we can see how to apply that. Let me show you the example. So here is the explanation from Google, that you can go to Material Design Guidelines and you will see how they work with that, how they explain it. Like basically, like the ideal range is from 40 to 60 pixels, and this is the ideal range, and everything else is too short or too wide, and this is for short lines. Let me show you from my experience how I use the length of the text and how I work with that, so you will understand it a little bit better. So here I have 3 alphabets and space between them, which brings us to 80 characters. So here I have 80 characters, which is pretty much, a lot. So here I will have 54 characters, 2 alphabets and 2 spaces. So this is 54. So my ideal range is somewhere here. Somewhere here is my ideal range of the length of the text. But how can I use it? Why I should know about that? Simply, when we already created our grid, by using this system, like by understanding how to use the length of the text, we can define how much columns we can have of the text on our layout. And for example, here we see that our ideal range is somewhere here, maybe up to here, which means that we can use this text that is defined previously. This is exactly what we defined already. This is our body 1, 1828. Everything is clear for us here. Okay, this is our text, and this text means that this text should be from somewhere 4, not so good, it's pretty close to narrow one, should be between 4 and 7 columns. When it will go too far, like this one, let me close this one. Yes, it's body 1, that's it. So when the line will be like this, it's already hard to read, because it's more than 80 characters already. Maybe it will be like 94, 93. It's already hard to read. When it will be like 3 columns like this one, it's also hard to read, because we have the column is too narrow, and it's hard to read this text. And we remember that readability is super crucial for us. So that's what we understand that we'll be using for our body 1 text. I'm not talking about body 2. Body 1 text, we'll be using the minimum width that we'll be using for our text will be 4 columns, but the ideal one will be between 5 and 7. So basically, for example, 6. And then when we look at that, this looks perfect. Even if I'll move it here, we'll bring this text up to here. We will choose our 14, which is half of the length. You already know all these things. So, and here we see that everything looks perfect, everything looks right, just because the text is of this width. We could go with 1 more column here. It's still okay, a little bit harder to read now, but we can't go really long like this line. While it looks good, especially with this pretty long heading, where heading should be much shorter, with this pretty long heading, this looks okay, but it's harder to read. It overwhelms our brain, and that's why what we have to do, we need to make it shorter, like this one. And again, talking about this one, headings are usually shorter, so that's why your table's booked. This is how it would look like in the real example when everything is defined perfectly. And then It doesn't mean that you should always use only left alignment. You can apply the same when you understand that, okay, the length of the text should be like 6 columns from 4 to 7 columns. Then you can take this text, just bring it, for example, if you need center alignment, just make center alignment, 6 columns, 14, and boom, it works here, even if I'll change to the same. And now we have perfect length of the text. Sometimes you can see that people are using text like this one, and now it's really hard to read, right? You won't read this text because it's too wide. And at the same time, if we'll go really small, like 4 columns is, well, like 50-50. As we remember here, we wouldn't go with the 4 columns actually because it's less than 40 characters. We can still use that just for the layout because we need to put like 3 columns of text, but 4 columns is really narrow already, where 6 looks just right in this particular case. Like even 5 will look great. Like 5 columns, center, perfect. 7 columns, let's go with 7. This is our 6, which is perfect. 7 columns. Looks great, absolutely. When we go further and further, it's already hard to read. So that's why this is what you need to keep in mind. And of course, remember about the that we are talking here mostly about main body text. If we are talking about headings, by default they should be short, pretty short. And if you use a really huge font, huge one for your text, in this case just keep in mind that it should be just comfortable to read. There is no particular rule in this. We won't have any particular rule in this case. For example, let's go with, you know what, like we decided to go with 40, and this will be 50. This will be our text. Let's remove this one. We want to make this brutalistic style. So this is our text. It's already hard to read, so what we will do, we will make it longer here, and this is the text that is somehow comfortable to read already. Maybe we can go with this one. This will be better, but when we apply this style to our alphabet, we will see that it's much shorter than the alphabet because the text is really huge, and usually we don't apply this text. So that's why in this case you should work with the text like this, with the bigger size, based mostly on your feeling and also your experience, where you will understand, okay, like this one looks right, this one looks much better, still okay. If we will choose the text like this, now it's really hard to read. Too many lines, too short, and too many lines, and the horizontal and vertical rhythm is broken. We're just starting to understand the melody of the text that we created, and we have to jump to the next line and to jump to the next line, so it's broken. And when we have the text like this, then we have enough space to understand I'm a product designer who creates impactful and compelling business solutions for restaurants across Canada to make a smooth and seamless experience for your guest. Awesome. While here, I'm a product designer who creates impactful and compelling businesses, solutions for restaurants across Canada to make a smooth. You see, we are breaking too much. And when it's really like long, like this one, I'm a product designer who creates impactful and compelling business solutions for restaurants across Canada to make a smooth and seamless experience for guests. A little bit better, but still too long. So that's why, again, working with text, remember about vertical and horizontal rhythm. And because we are talking here about the length of the text, keep in mind that when you're working with text, for the main body text, this should be the length of your text. For headings, for bigger sizes, you should apply like just your logic and keep in mind readability and in general accessibility of your text, that you still can read this text. And one more example that I wanted to show you, okay, two of them, that for mobile, even with this text 1828 that we already defined previously, the length of the text is already a little bit more than one alphabet, and this applies like for short lines. We can't do anything here because this is already the size of the screen, so that's why this is what we will get. And as you can see, this doesn't look perfect. Like if I would create the short for dribble, I would make this text shorter. So now it looks much better. For this text, what I would do, I would also probably make it shorter. So now, and I would remove this one. So now everything looks clean and perfect and so on. But again, we are real UX UI designers here, and we understand that the content is dynamic, and especially when we are creating the solution like responsive solution for our web design, where we'll have a huge screen and then we'll need to put it onto the small screen. Of course, what we can do, we can reduce the size of our text. Too many numbers, okay. We can reduce the size of our text, and this will be, for example, for body one, we will use 16, 24, but not for 24. And now it looks a little bit better in terms of like text. It's the ratio between the size of the screen and the text is a little bit better, but at the same time, again, we are real, and let's talk about real text. And if we decided to go with 1828 and it works across all the devices, then why not to use it, despite of the fact that because of this dynamic content we see this reverse of text and it's a little bit hard to read. We can't overcome this when we have dynamic real content. But what we can keep in mind, the length of the text, especially for web design, for desktop versions. And here, short lines. What is short line of the text? You have just one sentence, which is pretty short, just a couple of words, like this one. And for short lines of text, the length should be between 20 and 40 characters, which is here, from 20 to 40 characters. When we'll take a look at the columns, we understand that we should use for short lines something between 3 columns in this particular case, because we use this grid, between 3 columns and up to 5 columns of text. If we use 2 columns, you see it's really, now we can't catch this information, but we jump too fast to the next line. When it's just one line like this, what's wrong with here, or with this one? Everything is okay, except the line is too wide. We have just one line of text, and in this case we have too much space, white space around this text, and we have to go through all of this. So our brain will get tired a little bit faster rather than when we will go with something like 5 columns or even 4 columns here. But 4 columns we have previously, let's go with 5 one. So this one is much easier to read already because we will catch this information much faster rather than when we have line like this. And especially it works here. I have just one piece of information, but when we have, for example, columns like here, as you can see, when we have lots of text like this one, which is short and narrow, then our eyes already overwhelmed with too many elements. When we have something like this, we have too much white space, and again it's harder for us to read. So that's why we are applying here like 4 columns for our text. If our text would be bigger, for example, then it would be okay. If our text, if we had more text here, like this one, it would also be okay. But because we have short lines like this, it's better to use something like 4 columns length. In these 4 columns, again, don't keep in mind 4 columns, keep in mind the number of characters, because the width of our columns is defined by our grid that we previously created, and the text is also defined by its size. So we have to keep in mind the number of characters of the text that we will have. So that's why always keep in mind the number of characters. And once you will work more and more with text, and especially when you will try to practice more with these 2-3 alphabets, you will understand that it saves you lots of time, and also your eyes will understand what is defined as short line and what is defined as the long one. So you will find the ideal range for your text. How to improve both of these things? Again, if we would use, for example, more text here and, for example, less text instead here, then it will be completely okay. Then this one is okay. We would transform these guys into these ones. And the reason for that is because we have a long line of text and it will be much easier for us to read. We already defined it in the previous when we talked about long text. This one will be considered okay, especially when we have icons about them or just any kind of numbers. Too much. Of course, the icons should be different, but here we will understand that this works just like a label. This is not just a text, this is like caption and a label or just short information that we want to express on our website. Again, it can be 100 plus, and this is a huge number here. Boom. So this text is just a label, like a caption to this number. But when we had what we had previously, then keep in mind the length of the text if you want to create something really cool. Of course, in some cases we can't predict how our text will work with dynamic content, but when you can, keep this in mind, and especially in your designs. And especially if you are responsible for the copy, if you are writing all this text, then you can write shorter or longer text, so your design will look amazing. Now you know what the length of the text you should apply, how to define it, how to use it, where to use it, and we are ready for the next lesson.